Let us pray. As Canadians and as Albertans, we give thanks for the precious gifts of freedom and peace which we enjoy. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we rededicate ourselves to the valued traditions of parliamentary democracy as a means of serving our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
The member for Edmonton Jasper Place.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 252, the Pulp Mill Pollution Control Act. The purpose of the bill is for help this government put its money where its mouth is to provide for legislative stepwise reduction in toxic emissions from pulp mills to reach the target of 0 by July 1st, 2002.
The honourable member for Edmonton Jasper Place has moved first reading of Bill 252, the Pulp Mill Pollution Control Act. Those in favor of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 252, Pulp Mill Pollution Control Act, introduced by the Honourable Mr. McInnes, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table with the Assembly today a report titled Response to the Recommendations of the Tornado Victims Committee, is dated July 1989.
Minister of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table a response to question number 187 that was accepted by the Assembly on June 29th.
Additional? Minister of Labour.
Speaker, it gives me great pleasure today to table with the Assembly the Alberta Plan for Action for Women, subtitled A Proud History, A Bright Future.
Thank you.
Introduction of special guests.
The Minister of Occupational Health and Safety.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure on behalf of the Minister of Recreation and Parks to introduce to you and through you to the member of the House a group of volunteers who are seated in your gallery. They were here today for the Blue Flame Torch Relay ceremonies, and that took place on the steps of the Legislative Building. They're representatives of the City of Edmonton, the town of Brooks, and the relay sponsors. And as I ask them to stand, the sponsors of the Blue Flame Torch are Mr. Gordon Monk of Northwestern Utilities, Mr. Jerry Mangry, Northwest Utilities, and Mr. Gene Sadvorny, Canadian Western Natural Gas. The other persons I want to introduce, Mr. Speaker, are sponsors of the Alberta Sports Council and the Alberta Games, and they include Ms. Sherry Dutton, Mr. Brian Olson, Ms. Diane Young, Mr. Vic Lashko, Mr. Bob Benendike, Mr. Cheryl Moore, and Mr. Doug Fulford. I would ask these members, all these volunteers, to stand, and I want to say on behalf of the Minister and all the members here that we're gratified that these people take the time to encourage our young people to get involved in sports, and I think we should welcome them with a real warm Alberta welcome.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the provincial treasurer. Mr. Speaker, even with all the government support Albertans well know that Gainer's owner, Peter Pocklington, has no particular loyalty to this province, Mr. Speaker. All he cares about is the bottom line, his own bottom line, Mr. Speaker.
Right.
He owed no loyalty to the hog producers in northern Alberta when he tried to destroy the marketing board. He owed no loyalty to his own workers when he tried to destroy their union, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Pocklington has even holds this government to the tune of $67 million to cover his existing debt and finance his day-to-day operations. Mr. Speaker, and we're now concerned about the news of Mr. Pocklington's negotiations with the government of Quebec, Mr. Speaker, and according to the Quebec officials, also negotiations with the government of Ontario.
Money wherever they
Mr.
can.
Speaker, we're concerned obviously about losing what we have here in Edmonton.
Sure.
My question to the Treasurer, will the Treasurer tell us what he knows about the negotiations between Mr. Pocklington and the Quebec government and or the Ontario government and the possible implications for this province?
3 questions.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member has covered a lot of territory, and for me to deal with it in one very brief reply may be somewhat difficult. I note, though, that the significant change in consistency in the member's position, on one hand, when we talked previously about the reason for providing the $55 million loan guarantee and the $6 million special loan, we argued very vociferously and very strongly that we were protecting jobs, ensuring diversification took place here. And now, Mr. Speaker, the member finds it convenient to take the other side of the question. I hope all Albertans notice that inconsistency in position.
Again.
What we have here, Mr. Speaker, is a national company, an international company, which is in fact taking advantage of the free trade opportunities which will allow industries in Alberta, particularly the agricultural industries, to extend their boundaries both on a national basis and an international basis, and that company is now doing that. With respect to the need to deal with other provinces, Mr. Speaker, obviously a company of this order, already operating in the province of Quebec in this case, is examining all possibilities for expansion in that province.
Well,
Yeah, that's right.
Mr. Speaker, what a cavalier attitude. This
Yep.
has implications for this province and our money, Mr.
Our
Speaker.
money.
And by the non-answer from the Treasurer, I take he doesn't know what's going on.
Or he condones.
But in view, so the Alberta taxpayers know precisely, Mr. Speaker, precisely what we're into, would the Treasurer document and table the documents so we know what obligations that this Mr. Pocklington has with the people of Alberta? Will he table those documents
Right
here
on.
today?
Mr. Speaker, what I'll do is explain again what we have in terms of our security. First of all, we have taken security against a range of assets which are located all across the Canadian profile. In other provinces, a head office essentially here in Alberta. We have taken clear and legal position against those assets to protect our position. And we did that at appraised values at the time the loan and the guarantee was put in place. Secondly, make it very clear, Mr. Speaker, that the terms of the master agreement under which the Gainers Company, the Pocklington Company operate with respect to our guarantee are such that no money and no guarantee of the province can allow any expansion or extension of that company into another province. And so that the economic benefits remain here, the strength of the economic growth stays here, and the jobs stay here, Mr. Speaker. Now, that's the fundamental condition under which this agreement is put in place. Now, secondly, Mr. Speaker, let me make it very clear that it's my understanding in discussions by the Minister of Agriculture in Quebec that the company, Gainers, has been looking at a variety of expansion options in that province, including using the routine programs which are available to any private sector enterprise wanting to establish there. And those programs are public, Mr. Speaker. They're job assistance, there's some capital projects, and the company itself is looking to that. In the same fashion, Mr. Speaker, in the same fashion that the company did when it expanded its bacon plant into the province of Saskatchewan. Now, I didn't hear the member...
Thank you, Honourable Treasurer. Thank you. Order, please. Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer, given that the government, when they handed out this money, said it was for an expansion,
Yeah.
both in southern Alberta and expansion here in Edmonton, will the Treasurer now, in view of these negotiations, give a guarantee to this Assembly that those that plant will proceed in Picture Butte, and there will be an expansion here at the Edmonton plant, and following up their press release. Will they give us that commitment?
Right on.
Well, Mr. Speaker, now he's calling for additional guarantees. It's difficult here, Mr. Speaker, to understand what he's talking about, Mr. Speaker. I've indicated clearly the government's position with respect to how the Southern Alberta plant has taken place. Let me make it clear again, Mr. Speaker, that any time we make an advance under the term loan provided for in the Minister of Economic Development's budget, we ask the company for a statement to assure us, a signed statement, a statutory declaration, that they have not abridged the agreement that we have in place. And they gave that to us the last time the money was advanced, and we understood clearly the problem they're having with the Southern Alberta plant. Now, the amended agreement, Mr. Speaker, provides very clearly that unless the plant is constructed, or construction has commenced by September 30th of this year, no further amounts will be advanced against that loan. Now, it is a loan, Mr. Speaker. It's repayable, Mr. Speaker, and the first interest payment takes place in October of 1989. Now, if the member has some additional information that he wants to table here to let us know about the condition of that company, or he has some new information about how the province of Quebec is responding, he should tell us. Because I have answered his question. I have given the information as I know it, Mr. Speaker. If he has further information, then it's incumbent upon him to advise me so I can take additional action.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Next election, you can ask us to table it, Mr. Speaker.
That's right. We'll be glad to.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. We have Donald Cormier, Peter Pocklington, and the Conservative government. What a threesome, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr.
Right.
Speaker, in his attempt to deflect responsibility for his role in the collapse of the principal companies, the Premier has been hiding behind the member for Three Hills and just about anyone else he can find. Mr. Speaker, on Friday, the Premier said about the November 1985 memo, and I quote, "The attachment did not call for action by priorities." Mr. Speaker, well, Albertans would expect that a Premier, the chair of the Priorities Committee, will have looked at the serious findings in that report and decide to take action himself. That's what premiers and leaders are for.
Right.
They initiate action, Mr. Speaker.
Here, here.
They don't administer with a hope and a prayer. But my question to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, now that the Premier has changed his story and admitted that he was aware of the problems at FIC, AIC in November 1985, why did it take until June 1987 for this government to do something about it?
Mr. Speaker, there's absolutely no change in the government story.
Just not doing your job.
Mr. Speaker, here it is, typical of this leadership from this Premier, Mr.
Here,
Speaker.
here.
And Mr. Speaker, from 1985 he knew, 1987, June 1987, nothing happened, Mr. Speaker. Meanwhile, during that time, more innocent investors were hurt, and now it has cost the taxpayers a minimum of $65 to $85 million. Mr. Speaker, does the Premier really believe that blaming all the problems on the former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs absolves this government and this Premier from responsibility for this fiasco?
Well, the allegations contained in the question are completely false, Mr. Speaker. That is not what I did. As a matter of fact, I was very clear in my statement to the legislature that I was not blaming the Honourable Minister, but in fact I was dealing with a report from an independent third party to the Alberta court. That is the matter of fact that I made to the legislature. I've already told the people of Alberta what high regard I hold the member for Three Hills in.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the question is to this Premier, when is he going to accept some leadership and admit right from the top down, including him, this government is responsible and this Premier is responsible for the fiasco in principle?
I can only assume, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member was either not in the House on Friday or else was not listening or could not read the government's position, because the response covered those matters completely.
That's right.
Edmonton Glengarry, Leader of the Liberal Party, followed by Calgary Fish Creek, then Edmonton Strathcona.
Speaker, the Premier has attempted to reconcile two glaring facts in the Code report. In the response, the government response that he read last Friday, Premier indicated that he insisted on getting certain facts, that information was hard to obtain, and we now know from two ministers, that one saying that discussions did take place in Priorities Committee, and the other, a former minister, saying that had she known that she had complete and total charge, she would have taken different action. My question then is to the Premier. Accepting then that the Priorities Committee had discussed the issue according to the evidence of the former minister, who then did the Premier insist on getting the information from?
Mr. Speaker, maybe you can direct the honourable member, but surely, if I understand his question, is a former minister speaking about a Priorities Committee under a former Premier is somehow a question that I should be answering? Hardly.
Mr. Speaker, given that provincial auditors knew most of the facts for years and years on FIC and AIC and were informing the government accordingly, how could you or why would you brazenly say that you had difficulty, that is, the government or the Premier had difficulty in getting information on FIC, AIC?
Mr. Speaker, it's remarkable that the honourable member, having had the code report and the government's response and 2 years of testimony before Mr. Code, is still unable to come to conclusions which Mr. Code was able to come to.
Well, we're not getting any answers again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, accepting the former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs' observation, statement, that had the Minister known that she was in total and complete charge, things would have been different. What other people, Mr. Premier, were given the responsibility to deal with FIC and AIC? Tell this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, surely the honourable member would know, if he, maybe because he's a rookie in the House, that obviously we can't reply to reports that he is providing to the House, some hearsay report.
Thank you. Member for Calgary Fish Creek. Calgary Fish Creek. Calgary Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister responsible for women's issues. I was pleased, Mr. Speaker, by the Minister's announcement yesterday of the Alberta Plan for Action for Women. The plan, frankly, contains many worthy goals and good initiatives which should help to improve the status of women in our province. But, Mr. Speaker, I regret I could find no initiatives that specifically addressed Native or immigrant women. Will the Minister explain to the Assembly today why the plan does not address these two important groups in our province?
Mr. Speaker, the goals and initiatives that are outlined in the Plan for Action for Women are designed to benefit all women, whatever their background. And as an example, one of the initiatives that we've announced is increased daycare subsidies for low-income women and men. That will benefit many who are Native and immigrant. We're also providing things such as increased funding for daycare, for sheltered women's outfits in the north, and also for satellite homes in the north, and those will benefit women in that way. We're also announcing a community-based funding pilot program, and that too will combat family violence, and again will benefit many, because a proponent of that is going to address cross-cultural needs. I could go on and on, Mr. Speaker, but my point is that many of the initiatives that we have announced in this Alberta Plan for Action for Women indeed will benefit all women, including those from a multiversity of ethnic backgrounds.
Well, to a certain extent, Mr. Speaker, I accept her point, but will the Minister not agree that immigrant and Native women sometimes face special challenges that aren't encountered by women in general?
I accept that point, Mr. Speaker, but I would also make this point, that we have in the past announced a number of initiatives, and one we were speaking of yesterday afternoon in this Assembly, and that is our Interdepartmental Task Force on Foreign Credentials, which will impact most directly on immigrant men and women, and is a very important issue for them as it is for us. And that's just one example. I would also mention that at least a third, about 3 of the women who were recently appointed to the advisory committee have had years of direct experience working with Native and immigrant communities, and in ways such as that we are expecting to continue our working with and for those communities.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given that her document is partly subtitled A Bright Future, will the minister tell us today if we can expect to see some future initiatives that specifically address the unique challenges faced by immigrant and Native women in Alberta?
The answer, Mr. Speaker, is yes. This document is designed as the government strategy, and it will, in that regard, help all Alberta women. It is our belief that if government helps women, they will help themselves, and we are truly going to support them in their efforts. We think that based on the past efforts that women in this province have made for years and years now, and continuing that partnership, strong women will build stronger families, will build stronger communities, and therefore we will all be better off. So the answer, Mr. Speaker, to the member's question is yes, absolutely.
Edmonton Strathcona, followed by Calgary Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Attorney General and concerns the principal fiasco and my continued attempts to see what, if anything, his department is doing about it. And in particular, I referred to the agreement of the 21st August 1987 between the trustees of the principal group of companies and certain members of the Cormie family. I'll file copies of this for the Assembly, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney General will recall that the purpose of that agreement was that in consideration of the Cormie people retaining assets worth some $10 million, they gave up all claim on the remaining assets of the group. So my question to the Attorney General is this.
What a deal.
He will recall that the defense of the Cormies to the attachment of those assets was destroyed if they were obtained by fraud, given the contents of the code reports. What efforts is the department making on behalf of the hard-pressed taxpayers of Alberta for relief by at least sequestering those assets?
10 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I believe this is deja vu. We've been through this, although not specific to the particular document the honourable member refers to. The assets of the Cormie family have been, through an undertaking from one solicitor to another solicitor, tied up, and I understand that there's even some of the documentation to that which I'm not able to table before the House, but the assets are in fact secure.
Yes, dealing with another aspect then, Mr. Speaker, in relief of the hard-pressed taxpayer, what attempts will be made to throw back upon the malefactors in this disaster the very large costs of the code inquiry, again in relief of the taxpayer of this province?
Mr. Speaker, I informed the House some time ago, and the Premier in his comments also said that the full force of the law will be taken against any of the parties that are culpable in this particular matter. And on a criminal basis, the RCMP are investigating, and on a civil basis, there's a number of actions that are being planned, not only by the investors, but by the government.
Yeah. Cost usually means legal costs, Mr. Speaker, but my final supplementary is to the Treasurer. Another big item of costs, of course, are the costs of the trustees, receivers, and managers. What vigilance is the Treasurer exercising to ensure that the costs of these people are not excessive and therefore a further indirect drain on the taxpayers of the province?
All vigilance, Mr. Speaker.
Calgary Buffalo, followed by Rocky Mountain House, then Calgary Mountain View. Calgary Buffalo, thank you very much. Calgary Belmont, Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Premier, the honourable member from Three Hills has recently stated that she didn't realize that she was in total control when she was the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs. Yet she alone has been made to pay in terms of her reputation and job when it's clear that senior ministers and premiers were calling the major shots. And it's just not right that those who are equally or more responsible are not accepting their share of the blame. So I'm wondering whether the Premier could tell us what was the role of the two priority task forces which he disbanded in November 1985 if the minister and the member from Three Hills was supposedly calling all of the shots.
411. Carry on, Mr. Premier, but the chair is concerned that at least two members today, and both of them lawyers, seem not to know anything about Beauchene 411, subsection 2. Premier? Premier?
Mr. Speaker, the government's response to the code report has been full and detailed. It was given on Friday.
Well, the fact is that the Premier has not been answering this question, Mr. Speaker, and I'm wondering whether the Premier is prepared to admit that these task forces were set up in 1984 and 1985, in which he disbanded, were to ensure that no major action took place with respect to financial institutions without the approval of either former Premier Lougheed or the former provincial treasurer.
No, Mr. Speaker.
Well, perhaps the Premier is prepared to tell us why the former member from Three Hills is being singled out when there is so obviously responsibility falling on himself and on the provincial treasurer and former Premier Lougheed. Why just the member from Three Hills?
Mr. Speaker, as I already said today in the House to the House, the matter of the member for Three Hills, was dealt with on Friday, and it was the case of Mr. Code's finding. I wanted to make it very clear that blame is not being placed on that minister by me or the government.
Thank you. And the chair also points out that to the member for Calgary Buffalo, another reference in Beauchene, which is 409, subsection 7. Question must adhere to the proprieties of the House in terms of inferences, imputing motives, or casting aspersions upon persons within the House or out of it. And would point out, the chair points out that the former Premier of the province was not called by that inquiry. Therefore, the question is indeed out of order. The chair recognizes Rocky Mountain House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is to the Solicitor General. Many of my constituents and I have been very concerned that victims of crime don't get any help after being victimized. I'm very pleased that the Conservative government in Ottawa has seen fit in their wisdom to follow through on their promise that they would not forget the victims in the revision to the criminal code. Mr. Speaker, to the Solicitor General, has the province of Alberta been involved in the development of the victim surcharge program that becomes effective July 31st, 89?
Mr. Speaker, the Solicitor General's Department and the Attorney General's Department have been involved in conferences with all provinces and the federal government since this matter came on the conference agenda a year or so ago. So the answer is yes, we have been involved.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. To the Solicitor General, when will this House address the matter of provincial legislation so that the funds that will be generated can be passed on to Alberta-based organizations?
Mr. Speaker, we require legislation in order to disperse the funds that are starting to be collected today in the courts. The legislation came into effect yesterday, and as of today, the surcharge will be made in all the criminal courts in Alberta, a surcharge of 1 to 15% or $35 minimum, where in fact there is no fine, but legislation is required. That will be developed for the next session of this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering why are we waiting till next year to deal with this matter?
Mr. Speaker, as of today, the particular fund has no dollars in it at all, and we have no certainty as to the number of dollars that will be available, and we will have to, in fact, make a study and consult with those groups that are already in the field of victim assistance to make a decision precisely what is going to happen with those funds when we find out what groups we will be dealing with, as well as how much money we will be dealing with.
Calgary Mountain View, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the provincial treasurer told the Assembly that the fundamental regulatory responsibility for FIC and AIC was here in this province. In essence, Mr. Speaker, by this admission, he let regulatory agencies in other provinces off the hook. But at the same time, he said Alberta would keep its right to sue, along with those FIC, AIC investors, all third-party participants, including those other provincial regulatory agencies. In short, Mr. Speaker, by acknowledging Alberta's responsibility, he took away its bargaining position and undermined the basis of any claim Alberta might make on those other governments. To the provincial treasurer, on what basis does the Alberta government believe that actions against other regulatory agencies in other provinces can possibly be successful now that Alberta has accepted fundamental regulatory responsibility for this fiasco?
Love to know.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've heard some mishmash statements before, but this is going to receive the award of the day at least, if not the award of the year, Mr. Speaker. That just isn't what we have said at all. The member knows full well what it is we said, and I've explained that time and time again. If necessary, Mr. Speaker, to allow it to penetrate his cranium, I'd be glad to go back over it, but he's going to have to waste another question.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given that the admission by the provincial treasurer is found on page 1118 of Hansard, if he wants to look it up, that admission has given those other regulatory agencies a strong basis on which they can join with their citizens to sue Alberta. On what basis, Mr. Speaker, does the Alberta government believe that they can defend themselves from investors and regulatory agencies outside Alberta, when, after all, the provincial treasurer has acknowledged that it's Alberta that had the fundamental responsibility in this fiasco?
Real smart.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, the member has asked me for at least 5 legal opinions over the course of the few minutes that he's confused me, confused the government, confused Albertans, and confused the issue, Mr. Speaker. Clearly what we have said, and we will say it again, that should the settlement be provided to the contract holders and should they agree to give up that right, we would join with them in any and all possible actions against all third parties. Well, that's a very clear statement, Mr. Speaker. That's not a legal opinion. That's a political statement that we intend to pursue wherever possible all other third parties. Now, Mr. Speaker, the fact that we have said that we were the fundamental regulator because you know those companies were Alberta-based companies and you know that other provinces were depending on us for some regulatory efficiency, we have agreed to pay up to 75% by paying 18 cents in FIC and 15 cents or so in AIC. That's not a admission of any guilt, Mr. Speaker. That's an admission that we're going to do a fair deal, an equitable deal, one which the consumers, across Canada will understand and which will bring strength back to the financial markets of this province. It's much broader than a legal opinion, Mr. Speaker, and the narrowness of the member's view is well understood by everyone in Alberta as of today.
Mr. Speaker, given that Alberta is likely to join with investors in other provinces to sue their governments, and they in turn are likely to respond by suing the Alberta government right back, will the provincial treasurer now admit that his government strategy will only lead to a highly unusual and bizarre situation that will only highlight how badly this government has mishandled the principal fiasco from start to finish.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the opposition with the blue syndrome that they don't like to see the government operate in a fair manner, being received across Alberta as being reasonable government, having looked at the evidence of the code inquiry, having taken the time to reflect upon the choices available to us and making a sound decision. Now, the opposition doesn't like to see that, Mr. Speaker, but that in fact is what has happened, and that in fact is what the opposition knows has happened. Albertans are in the process now weighing carefully what we have done, and I think it's safe to say, Mr. Speaker, that the vast majority of Albertans agree with our position. And that's unfortunate for them, I understand that.
Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Calgary Milliken, then Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government committed $4 million last year to mitigate damage to fisheries habitat caused by the Old Man River Dam. Now, Public Works Supply and Services has undertaken a habitat project on the Crow's Nest River, which, believe it or not, has ruined the trout habitat it is supposed to improve. Here's the situation. We have the Department of Environment with 520 people, a huge amount of money planning and operating dams which would more appropriately be done by the Department of Public Works. And on the other hand, Public Works is undertaking fishery habitats projects which more appropriately fall within the mandate of the Minister of Fisheries, Lands and Wildlife. To the Forestry, Lands and Wildlife. To the Minister of Forests, why is it that Public Works is doing a fisheries habitat project which would more appropriately be done by his department?
Busy cuts. Mr. Speaker, on the whole area of the Old Man River, we committed ourselves to no net loss of recreational fishing opportunities. And part of the work that needed to be done now, and I want to make sure the record is accurate, not inaccurate, as far as the fisheries mitigation project in the Old Man River Dam, there's in-stream enhancement work now underway. And that'll take place in two periods, in the spring and in the fall. And the construction activity, temporarily results in a high silt load. It's temporary. It doesn't damage the fish. It does damage the fishery, the recreation fishing opportunities while that takes place. But it's short-term pain for a very short time in order to significantly enhance the fisheries habitat that's there. And my Fish and Wildlife staff have been very closely involved in making sure that everything is properly done.
I wonder whether it would be much better done if, in fact, it were done by the professionals in your department. To the Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services, why is it that the Department of Environment is supervising $85 million and 520 people in water resource management projects, including dams, when this would more appropriately be transferred to his department, and in fact the Minister of Environment made a commitment to transfer that activity to the Public Works Department?
Appears to be several questions, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps what's important at this point is to make sure that all members of the Assembly are up to date with respect to the fisheries mitigation plan that was raised in the first question. And I'll make it very clear, Mr. Speaker, that the program currently underway in the Blairmore area was developed in consultation with Alberta Environment, Fish and Wildlife Division of Alberta Forestry, Public Lands and Wildlife, the local advisory committee, the Fish and Wildlife Committee, subcommittee of the Municipal District of Pincher Creek as well. We had input from Trout Unlimited and representatives of the Old Man River Canoe and Kayak Association. And what is happening, of course, is a capital expenditure, Mr. Speaker. What we're doing is enhancing the fishery within the Old Man River Dam. It's a project that was clearly advertised to all citizens in the area some time ago, and it's one that's clearly understood as to what we're doing, and it meets with the commitments, the overall commitments of the government.
Yeah, it would be nice if he answered my question to him. To the Minister of Environment, would the Department of the Environment not be better able to assess the environmental impact of dams and other water resource management projects from an objective point of view if, in fact, his department did not have such a huge stake in the planning and operation of dams and water resource management projects in this province?
It's really quite simple, Mr. Speaker. The Department of the Environment conducts an environmental impact assessment prior to the construction of the dam to determine its environmental worthiness. And after the dam is constructed, under the Irrigation Headworks and Main Canals program, the Department of the Environment takes charge to make sure that there is efficient and proper delivery of the water. That's quite simple.
Calgary Milliken, followed by Edmonton Belmont, Westlock Sturgeon, and then Wainwright.
Mr. Speaker, we just had release of from Statistics Canada information on impaired drivers. It appears that, boy, Alberta's won on the thing. My question to the Solicitor General, we've got 756 out of every 100,000 people in this province were charged in 1988 with impaired driving, and I'd like to know what the Solicitor General is going to do to try to correct this problem.
Mr. Speaker, I've responded to this question a number of times in this session. However, I'm pleased to advise the member again that the Solicitor General's Department has initiated 42 different programs this year to attack the problem of impaired driving in this province. And of course, if the programs are successful, it only stands to reason that we are going to, in fact, catch more of those people that are on the road driving either impaired or drunk. And it's my hope that over the next few years that we will continue to lead the list in Canada, which will be adequate proof to myself that we are doing the job that we want to do in this area.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the fact that the Solicitor General's got 47 programs out there, but what I want to know is, the raw numbers here suggest that Alberta's got a major problem with impaired driving.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I didn't catch the question.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'll put it a little different. With your 47 programs you've got, the raw numbers still come back that we have a major problem in this province. And I would like to know what we're going to do to reduce these numbers down. And if you have some new initiatives, I guess.
It's because because of that rate and the record in Alberta that these programs are in, and they cover enforcement, they cover research, they cover education, and they cover the whole range of things. I would be pleased to supply the package to the member in order that he can review them and possibly give us suggestions in the department for other programs that we can bring in. In fact, are looking at other programs. However, we want to view carefully those programs that are already being implemented to see if they bring about the desired result. It is never expected that we will bring us to a zero rate.
Final supplement, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've raised the fines and the amount of punishment and so on. Has the Solicitor General considered one final initiative, and that is to have fines and punishment for those, including hotels or if a person at a private party that serves the booze and allows the guy to go out impaired and go on the road and maybe kill somebody?
Mr. Speaker, there has never been criminal liability laid upon the supplier of a legal substance, and I don't think there will be here. There may well be civil liability. The member brings up an increase in fines and suspensions that was passed by this legislature 1 year ago, and I remind the member, Mr. Speaker, that the figures that he is looking at are not for the immediate year on which these fines have newly been implemented and increased. Those figures will be available to us next year.
Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions today are for the Acting Minister of Career Development and Employment. Mr. Speaker, in the week of September 11th, the House of Commons Committee on Unemployment Insurance will be in Edmonton to hear submissions on the proposed changes to the Unemployment Insurance Act. The deadline for requesting the opportunity to meet with the committee has been moved back from today to 2 weeks from today. and it's still important to try and get notice in as soon as possible. My questions are, can the Minister assure the Assembly that the Department of Career Development and Employment will be making submissions to this committee on behalf of all Albertans?
Mr. Speaker, the position parliamentary democracies is that ministers talk to ministers, and the position of the province of Alberta with respect to changes in terms of unemployment insurance and or the like coming out of Ottawa, those submissions will be made directly to the responsible minister in Ottawa.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given that 12,000 Albertans are going to lose all of their benefits and that a further 73,000 Albertans stand to lose approximately $1,300, I'm sure that Albertans would like to know either why the government is acting so negligently and not allowing them to have input, or in fact what is going to be contained in the submissions that is going to be before the committee.
Mr. Speaker, the specific information provided by the honourable member in this question, I think, is under considerable question and of a considerable questionable merit. The changes basically that are being proposed by the federal government will have some impacts in terms of eligibility for unemployment insurance, the term, and also deal with fraudulent cases with respect to unemployment insurance, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, there are going to be benefits, increased and improved benefits for maternity leave. Positions of this province and this government have been advocating for some period of time. The positions of our government with respect to parental leave and illness leave, as well, and most importantly of all, Mr. Speaker, the required and need to take some of these dollars and put them into training programs for long-term viable jobs are extremely important to this province. And I would add as well, Mr. Speaker, that the unemployment levels in our province have decreased dramatically over the last several years. When we had unemployment in this province as high as 13%, to now have unemployment in Alberta at essentially less than 7%.
And Mr. Speaker, the welfare rates are almost up 100% in the last 4 years as well. Well, Mr. Speaker, given that response from the Minister of, or the Acting Minister of Career Development and Employment, let's try the Minister of Family and Social Services. Given that almost half of those affected by these cuts will have incomes of less than $10,000 per year, will the Minister tell us if the Department has any plans in place to provide the estimated 5,200 Albertans who are going to be affected immediately come January 1st, what provision is there for those Albertans that are going to need assistance right away?
Mr. Speaker, as is so often the case, they take a very narrow perspective on how they evaluate situations, and what the member fails to take into consideration is the number of jobs that have been created in this province last year, the number of jobs that are being created in the province this year, and I can only say that we're very fortunate to be having to face the consequences of the changes to UIC here in Alberta at a time that our economy is on the upswing. I would also, Mr. Speaker, want to leave the member with the assurance that this department will continue to meet those basic needs of Albertans that come to us requiring social allowance, and we will continue to make sure that housing, clothing, and food, dental, optometric care is all provided for. We've done that in the past, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue to do that in the future.
Westlock, Sturgeon, then Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just north of here, a battle to protect number 1 and 2 farmland is being fought just at Carbondale by residents who have had 1,500 name petition ignored by the County Council and the Minister of Municipal Affairs, who won't even try to stop construction of a gas plant that's moving in on number 1 and 2 farmland. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, of course, the Minister of Environment, who's responsible for reclaiming land, will do nothing to stop the plant until the land is ruined first, so he can reclaim it. And then we have the Minister of Energy, Mr. Speaker, whose department is reported by MD Councillor as giving orders that gas plants should be able to locate where they want, number 1 farmland or not, because the government needs the money. To the Premier, Mr. Speaker, what kind of an output is he running here where number 1 and 2 farmland cannot be protected no matter if we're going to 4 different ministers? The Minister of Agriculture, by the way, has said it is not his responsibility.
Mr. Speaker, projects such as gas plants proceed through a regulatory process where all matters are taken into consideration.
Mr. Speaker, given that the Premier knows so little about it, let me move over and ask the Minister of Energy something. Will he give orders to the ERCB, or the Energy Resources Conservation Board, some people call it the Energy Resources Exploitation Board, that from now on, no hydrocarbon plant is to be located on number 1 and 2 farmland? Just no, no, no. Can he give that order?
Might we have unanimous consent to finish this line of questioning? Opposed? You mean there was no, no, no? Okay. Minister of Energy?
Mr. Speaker, the Premier just answered that question adequately. There is a regulatory process in place through the ERCB. If the honourable member had a concern, I would suggest that he should have intervened at the hearing, particularly if he's the MLA and he has a concern about the construction of this plant in his constituency. I'm surprised he's bringing it up here now.
Mr. Speaker, given that there is no authority to the ERCP, and I challenge any minister across there, any of those bright-eyed, I don't know what you want to call them, to come out and show me one line where any regulatory body in Alberta has the right to stop industrial development of 1 and 2 farmland. I challenge him. Mr. Premier, this to the Premier. Would he go and would he contact every one of his cabinet?
Order, please. Order. Thank you. Thank you. Order, please. Could we turn off the gas plant? Could we turn off the gas plant, please, honourable member? Thank you very much. Premier.
He ran out of gas. The answer is no, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you. Time for question period has expired. However, point of order, Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was called to order in a matter arising under 411.2 of Beauchene, which provides that a question may not seek information about matters which are in their nature secret, such as decisions or proceedings of cabinet, etc. And I'd simply suggest, Mr. Speaker, that I was seeking from the Premier information with respect to the role of several task forces which he disbanded, and I hope the Speaker is not suggesting that the role of these task forces would be considered to be cabinet secrets, particularly after the matter was dealt with so extensively by the code report. The second item is section 409.7 of Beauchene, which provides that a question must adhere to the proprieties of the House in terms of inferences, imputing motives, or casting aspersions upon persons within the House or out of it. And I would note that, Mr. Speaker, my references were with respect to political figures, ministers, and former ministers having made mistakes, and I would assume that if these kinds of references were considered to be within the intention of that rule and not part of question period or debate in this House, then we'd have nothing to talk about and might as well go home.
Well, with due deference, honourable member, the last comment is really ill-advised. The matter with regard to the chair calling the honourable member for Calgary Buffalo to order was indeed the question was asking the role of 2 priority task forces, and the chair was just giving admonition that that was indeed infringing upon that reference in Beauchene. The one that was cited, I'll find it here again. 411 subsection 2. And at that time of intervention, the chair also pointed out that the honourable member for Edmonton Glengarry first question there was along of a similar nature. We've had a number of those questions in the last few days, and the chair is bringing it to the attention of the House that all honourable members will indeed craft their questions a bit more carefully in that regard. The admonition with regard to the former Premier, having looked at the first draft of the Blues, in this case I would agree that the chair was a bit too fast on the draw on that one. So that would be seen as an apology to the honourable member on that one. The chair would also like to point out, though, for all honourable members, that perhaps they'd like to review the Blues and Hansard tomorrow and see, for example, that the questions as raised by the honourable member for Calgary Mountain View, the first two questions were out of order with respect to Beauchesne 408, subsection 1, subsection C, Beauchesne 409, subsection 3, Beauchesne 410, subsection 13, and the third question, the final supplementary, was indeed out of order according to Beauchesne 409, subsection 11, because it was just seeking an opinion. But again, the chair realizes from past experience in the House, it's very difficult to craft questions from time to time, but it is incumbent upon the members to look at Beauchesne from time to time to see that they are indeed working according to the rules. Orders of the day.